Rosa Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she jogged along the narrow trail that wound through Millionaire's Woods, the exclusive forest preserve that bordered the wealthy Riverside Heights neighborhood where she worked. At 42, she wasn't the fastest runner, but she was determined. Every morning before her shift began, she took this route through the woods, partly for exercise and partly because it was the only place she could find peace before facing another day of cleaning the mansions of people who barely acknowledged her existence. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Rosa's worn sneakers crunched softly on the fallen leaves as she followed the winding path deeper into the woods. She had discovered this trail 6 months ago when she started working for the Henderson family, whose sprawling estate backed up to the forest. Mrs. Henderson had mentioned during one of their rare conversations that the woods were private property, maintained by the Homeowners Association for recreational purposes. Rosa figured that as long as she stuck to the main trail and didn't bother anyone, no one would mind a maid taking her morning run. As she rounded a bend near the old oak grove, something caught her eye. At first, she thought it was just a pile of discarded camping gear, but as she slowed her pace, she realized with growing alarm that it was a person. A man was tied to one of the massive oak trees, his head slumped forward, dark hair hanging in his face. Thick rope bound his wrists behind the tree, and his expensive-looking clothes were torn and dirty. Rosa stopped running and approached cautiously. Her heart pounded, not from exercise but from fear and confusion. In her 20 years of domestic work, she had learned to mind her own business, to be invisible, to avoid getting involved in the problems of wealthy people. But this was different. This wasn't gossip about affairs or family disputes overheard while dusting expensive furniture. This was someone who appeared to be in real danger. "Hello," she called softly, looking around to make sure they were alone. "Are you okay?" The man's head lifted slowly, and Rosa gasped. Even with dirt smudged across his face and exhaustion evident in his features, she recognized him immediately. It was Alexander Blackwood, one of the most powerful men in the city. His face had been on the cover of business magazines, and his name was constantly in the news. He owned half the real estate in the metropolitan area and had interests in everything from technology companies to media outlets. Rosa had seen his picture in the society pages, usually attending charity galas with beautiful women on his arm. Alexander's eyes focused on her with difficulty. His lips were cracked and dry, and when he tried to speak, only a hoarse whisper came out. "Water," he managed to say. Rosa looked around nervously. The forest seemed eerily quiet, with only the sound of birds and the distant hum of traffic from the main road. She pulled the water bottle from her running belt and approached him carefully. As she got closer, she could see that his wrists were raw from the rope, and there were cuts and bruises on his face that looked fresh. "Who did this to you?" she asked, holding the water bottle to his lips so he could drink. Alexander drank greedily, water spilling down his chin. When he had enough, he leaned his head back against the tree and looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and desperation. "My brother," he said, his voice still rough but stronger. "Marcus did this." Rosa nearly dropped the water bottle. She had heard about Marcus Blackwood, Alexander's younger brother who worked in the family business. The newspapers always portrayed them as a close family, partners in building their empire. The idea that one brother would tie the other to a tree in the woods seemed impossible. "Your brother? But why would he?" Rosa stopped herself. She was getting involved in something that was way beyond her understanding, something that could be dangerous. She should call the police and walk away. But, as she looked at Alexander's face, she saw something that surprised her. Despite his wealth and power, despite being one of the most influential men in the city, he looked completely helpless and afraid. "I discovered something," Alexander said, his eyes darting toward the path as if he expected someone to appear at any moment. "Marcus has been stealing from the company, making deals with criminals, money laundering. I confronted him yesterday, told him I was going to the authorities. He..." Alexander's voice trailed off as he shook his head. "I never thought my own brother would try to kill me." Rosa's hands trembled as she processed what he was telling her. This wasn't just about family drama or business disputes. If what Alexander was saying was true, Marcus Blackwood was involved in serious criminal activity, and he had tried to murder his own brother to keep it secret. And now she, a maid who just wanted to get some exercise before work, was standing in the middle of it all. "We need to call the police," she said, reaching for her phone. "No." Alexander's voice was sharp with panic. "You don't understand. Marcus has connections everywhere. Half the police department, judges, politicians, they're all in his pocket. If you call the police, they'll either ignore it or make sure I disappear permanently." Rosa stared at him, her phone halfway out of her pocket. Everything in her working-class upbringing told her to trust the police, to let the authorities handle situations like this. But she had also learned from years of working in wealthy households that rich people played by different rules, that money could buy things that ordinary people couldn't imagine, including silence and protection. "Then, what am I supposed to do?" she asked. "I can't just leave you here." Alexander studied her face carefully. "What's your name?" "Rosa Martinez." "Rosa, I know this is crazy, and I know you have no reason to trust me or get involved in this mess. But I need your help. Marcus thinks I'm dead. He left me here to die, probably planning to come back later to dispose of my body. But if I can get to my lawyer, to the FBI contacts who aren't on his payroll, I can expose everything. I just need to get free and get somewhere safe." Rosa looked at the ropes binding his wrists. They were thick and tied with complicated knots that would take time to untie, even if she had the right tools. She thought about her normal morning routine, finishing her run, going home to shower and change, then heading to the Henderson house to start her workday. Mrs. Henderson expected her at 8 o'clock sharp, and being late would mean having to explain herself, possibly losing the job that paid for her small apartment and helped support her teenage daughter Maria. But, as she looked at Alexander Blackwood, bleeding and desperate, tied to a tree by his own brother, she realized that some things were more important than keeping a job. She had spent her entire adult life being careful, staying invisible, avoiding risks. Maybe it was time to take a chance on doing the right thing, even if it meant putting herself in danger. "Okay," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I'll help you." Relief flooded Alexander's face. "Thank you. There's a maintenance shed about a quarter-mile back down the trail. I saw it when Marcus was dragging me here. There might be tools there, something to cut these ropes." Rosa nodded and started back down the trail at a quick jog. Her mind raced as she ran. What was she getting herself into? Alexander Blackwood was worth billions of dollars, but he was also apparently the target of a murder plot by his own brother. If she helped him, would Marcus come after her too? And what if Alexander was lying? What if this was some kind of elaborate setup? She found the shed exactly where Alexander had said it would be, hidden behind a cluster of pine trees and nearly invisible from the main trail. The door was secured with a simple padlock, but the wood around the latch was old and rotted. Rosa picked up a large rock and, after looking around to make sure no one was watching, smashed the lock off the door. Inside the shed, she found exactly what she needed, a pair of heavy-duty wire cutters and a sharp utility knife. She also grabbed a first aid kit from a shelf and a clean rag that she could use to help clean Alexander's wounds. As she ran back toward the oak grove, Rosa thought about her daughter Maria, who was a senior in high school with dreams of attending college. Maria was smart, much smarter than Rosa had ever been, and she deserved a chance at a better life. The job with the Henderson family paid well enough to help with college expenses, but if Rosa lost it because of this situation, she didn't know how she would manage to keep her promise to help Maria get an education. But when she reached Alexander and saw him struggling weakly against the ropes, barely conscious from dehydration and exhaustion, she knew she was making the right choice. Money and jobs could be replaced. A human life could not. "I found tools," she said, kneeling behind the tree to examine the ropes around his wrists. "Rosa," Alexander said quietly as she worked to cut through the thick fibers. "I want you to know that if we get through this, I won't forget what you're doing for me." Most people would have walked away. "Most people don't find billionaires tied to trees," Rosa replied, trying to keep the mood light despite the seriousness of the situation. The wire cutters were sharp, but the ropes were thick, and it was taking longer than she had hoped. As she worked, Alexander told her more about what had happened. He had been suspicious of Marcus for months, noticing discrepancies in financial reports and questionable business deals that didn't make sense. When he hired a private investigator to look into his brother's activities, he discovered that Marcus had been using their company as a front for money laundering operations, working with organized crime families to clean illegal proceeds through legitimate real estate investments. "I confronted him yesterday evening in his office," Alexander explained, wincing as Rosa's efforts to cut the ropes jostled his injured wrists. "I told him I had evidence, that I was going to turn it over to the FBI. He seemed calm at first, said we could work something out. Then, he offered me a drink to celebrate finding a solution. I was stupid enough to trust him." "He drugged you?" "Must have. Next thing I knew, I was waking up tied to this tree with Marcus standing over me. He said he was sorry it had come to this, but family loyalty only went so far. He told me the animals would take care of disposing of my body, and, by the time anyone found me, if they ever did, it would be too late to connect it to him." Rosa finally cut through the last strand of rope, and Alexander's arms fell free. He cried out in pain as circulation returned to his hands, but he was free. Rosa helped him to his feet, noting that he was unsteady and weak from his ordeal. "Can you walk?" she asked. "I think so. We need to get out of these woods as quickly as possible. Marcus said he would be back this morning to check on me, to make sure I was dead." Rosa felt a chill run down her spine. "What time is it now?" She checked her watch and felt her stomach drop. "It's already 7:30. I've been here longer than I thought." "Then, we need to move now," Alexander said urgently. "Which way is the nearest road?" Rosa thought quickly. The trail she usually ran connected to several exit points, but the closest one would bring them out near the main entrance to the Riverside Heights community. It would be the fastest route, but it would also be the most visible. If Marcus was looking for them, it would be the logical place to watch. "This way," she said, supporting Alexander's weight as they started down a smaller trail that she had explored a few weeks earlier. It would take them to a service road that connected to a less affluent neighborhood where Rosa lived. It would be a longer walk, but it would be safer. As they made their way through the woods, Rosa couldn't help but think about how surreal the situation was. 12 hours ago, she had been worried about whether she had enough money to pay for Maria's SAT prep course. Now she was helping one of the most powerful men in the city escape from what amounted to an assassination attempt by his own brother. Her biggest concern had shifted from mundane financial worries to wondering whether she would live through the morning. "Rosa," Alexander said as they carefully navigated a steep section of the trail, "when this is over, when Marcus is in prison where he belongs, I want to do something for you. You're risking your life for someone you don't even know." "You don't owe me anything," Rosa replied, though she had to admit that the thought of financial security for her and Maria was tempting. "This is just the right thing to do." But, even as she said it, Rosa wondered what would happen next. They weren't out of danger yet, and she had no idea how they were going to prove what Marcus had done or convince anyone to believe their story. All she knew was that she had made her choice, and there was no turning back now. The sound of voices echoing through the woods made both of them freeze. Someone was calling Alexander's name, but the tone didn't sound like that of rescuers. It sounded like hunters looking for their prey. "Move faster," Alexander whispered urgently. Marcus brought help. Rosa's heart pounded as she and Alexander moved as quickly and quietly as possible through the dense underbrush. The voices behind them were getting closer, and she could hear the sound of multiple people crashing through the woods, not bothering to be subtle about their search. Alexander was moving better now that his circulation had returned, but he was still weak from his ordeal, and Rosa found herself supporting more of his weight than she would have liked. "This way," she whispered, pulling him toward a narrow creek that ran through the lower part of the forest. She had discovered it during one of her longer runs and remembered that it led toward the service road. More importantly, walking in the creek would help hide their footprints and make them harder to track. They slipped down the muddy bank and into the cold water. Rosa gasped as the shock of it hit her legs, but Alexander didn't complain. They waded upstream, using the overhanging branches for cover. The water was only ankle deep in most places, but the creek bed was rocky and uneven, making it difficult to move quickly. "Alex! I know you're out here." The voice that rang out through the trees was different from the others, younger and, with an undertone of frustrated anger. "This is pointless, brother. You're only making this harder on yourself." Rosa looked at Alexander, who had gone pale at the sound of his brother's voice. "That's Marcus," he whispered. "He sounds angry. How many people do you think he brought?" Rosa asked, trying to keep her voice low. "At least 3 or 4, based on what I'm hearing. Marcus never did anything himself if he could pay someone else to do it." Alexander paused to catch his breath, leaning against a large boulder in the middle of the creek. "Rosa, you need to understand something. Once Marcus realizes I'm free, he's going to assume someone helped me. When he figures out it was you, you'll be in as much danger as I am." Rosa had already come to that conclusion herself, but hearing Alexander say it out loud made it feel more real. She thought about Maria, who would be getting ready for school right now, probably wondering why her mother wasn't home yet. Maria knew that Rosa went for morning runs, but she also knew that her mother was always back by 7:15 at the latest. If Rosa didn't make it home, Maria would be alone, and she might never know what had happened. "We can't think about that right now," Rosa said, forcing herself to focus on the immediate problem. "We just need to get to safety and, then, figure out how to expose what Marcus is doing." They continued wading up the creek, moving as fast as they dared while trying to avoid making noise. Rosa's running clothes were soaked through, and she was starting to feel the cold, but adrenaline kept her moving. Behind them, the voices seemed to be spreading out, suggesting that Marcus and his men were conducting a systematic search of the area. "There!" Alexander pointed ahead to where the creek passed under a small concrete bridge. "That's the service road. If we can get to the other side without being seen, we can follow it out of the woods." As they approached the bridge, Rosa could see tire tracks in the mud on both sides of the creek. The service road was used by maintenance crews and delivery vehicles for the exclusive neighborhood, which meant there might be traffic, but it also meant there was a chance of getting help from someone. They climbed carefully up the bank on the far side of the bridge, using the concrete structure for cover while they listened for sounds of pursuit. For a moment, the woods were quiet except for the normal sounds of birds and small animals. Then, they heard Marcus's voice again, much closer than before. "Check the creek bed. If he's trying to avoid leaving tracks, he would use the water." "We need to move now," Alexander said urgently. They emerged from under the bridge and onto the gravel service road. Rosa had never been so happy to see a mundane stretch of roadway in her life. They turned left, heading toward the exit that would bring them to the working-class neighborhood where Rosa lived. It wasn't the closest route to the main highway, but it would take them away from the wealthy area where Marcus would expect them to go. As they walked quickly down the road, Rosa pulled out her phone and, finally, called someone, not the police, but her neighbor Mrs. Garcia, who had a car and had helped Rosa out of difficult situations before. "Carmen, it's Rosa. I need a huge favor, and I need you to not ask questions right now. Can you pick me up on Maple Street near the service entrance to Riverside Heights? It's an emergency." Mrs. Garcia had known Rosa for 8 years and had never heard her sound scared before. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, she said without hesitation. "Are you hurt?" "Not yet, but I might be soon. Please hurry, and, Carmen? If anyone asks, you never saw me today." Alexander was looking at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Rosa, you're putting your neighbor at risk too." Carmen Garcia survived 40 years in this neighborhood by knowing how to mind her own business when it matters. She'll be fine as long as we don't tell her anything she doesn't need to know. They reached Maple Street just as they heard the sound of vehicles approaching from the direction of the woods. Rosa grabbed Alexander's arm and pulled him behind a cluster of overgrown bushes near the street corner. Through the branches, they could see 2 black SUVs emerge from the service road and turn toward the main part of town. "They're searching the roads now," Alexander said grimly. "Marcus is being thorough." A few minutes later, Mrs. Garcia's old Honda Civic pulled up to the corner. Rosa had never been so happy to see the dented blue car in her life. She and Alexander hurried out from their hiding spot and climbed into the back seat. Mrs. Garcia took one look at Alexander's battered appearance and Rosa's muddy, wet clothes and simply said, "Where do you need to go?" "Somewhere safe where we can make some phone calls," Rosa said. "Maybe your cousin's auto shop? The one with the back office?" "Eduardo's place." "Good choice. Nobody looks for anything there except car repairs." As they drove through Rosa's neighborhood, Alexander was quiet, looking out the window at the small houses and apartment buildings with an expression Rosa couldn't quite read. She realized that despite his wealth and power, he probably rarely saw how ordinary people lived. The contrast with the mansions of Riverside Heights must have been striking. Eduardo's auto shop was exactly the kind of place Marcus Blackwood would never think to look for his billionaire brother. It was a small, family-owned business tucked between a laundromat and a corner grocery store, the kind of place that survived by word-of-mouth recommendations and honest work. Eduardo Garcia was Mrs. Garcia's nephew, a man in his 30s who had built a solid reputation for fair prices and reliable service. Mrs. Garcia spoke to Eduardo in rapid Spanish, explaining that Rosa needed to use his back office for an important phone call and that he should forget he ever saw them. Eduardo looked at Alexander's expensive clothes and obvious injuries and asked no questions. He simply led them to the small office behind the service bays and left them alone. "Now what?" Rosa asked as Alexander sank into one of the plastic chairs with obvious relief. "Now I need to call someone who can help us without being on Marcus's payroll." Alexander pulled out his phone, which had somehow survived his ordeal, though the screen was cracked. "There's an FBI agent I've worked with before on some white-collar crime cases. Her name is Special Agent Sarah Chen, and she's based in the federal building downtown. She's been investigating organized crime connections to legitimate businesses." "Will she believe you?" "I think so, especially if I can give her the evidence I collected about Marcus's activities. The problem is that the evidence is in a safe deposit box at First National Bank, and I need both my key and my identification to access it. Marcus has probably already reported me missing, which means my accounts might be frozen or monitored." Rosa thought about this problem. What if we don't try to access the evidence directly? What if we convince Agent Chen to get a warrant for the safe deposit box? That could work, but she would need probable cause. My word alone might not be enough, especially since Marcus can claim I'm having some kind of mental breakdown or that this is a family dispute. As they discussed their options, Rosa's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Mrs. Henderson, the woman whose house she was supposed to be cleaning that morning. "Rosa, you were supposed to be here 30 minutes ago. If you don't show up within the next hour, don't bother coming back. I can't rely on help that doesn't show up when scheduled." Rosa stared at the message, feeling a sick sensation in her stomach. She had known this would happen, but seeing it in black and white made it real. She had just lost the best-paying job she had ever had, the job that was supposed to help pay for Maria's college education. Alexander noticed her expression. "What's wrong?" "I just got fired," Rosa said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The woman I work for doesn't tolerate absences, and I was supposed to be at her house an hour ago." "Rosa, I'm so sorry. When this is over, I'll make sure you get your job back, or I'll find you a better one." "You can't fix this," Rosa said, more sharply than she intended. "You don't understand what it's like. Jobs like that don't grow on trees for people like me. Mrs. Henderson has a waiting list of women who want to work for her because she pays well and treats her help relatively decently. I can't just call her back next week and say it was all a misunderstanding." Alexander was quiet for a moment, and Rosa could see that he was trying to understand her perspective but struggling to relate to the reality of her situation. For him, losing a job was an inconvenience that money could fix. For her, it was a disaster that could derail her daughter's future. "You're right," he said finally. "I don't understand what it's like, and I can't fix this with a phone call. But, Rosa, you saved my life this morning. There has to be something I can do to make up for what you're losing." Before Rosa could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Maria's number, and Rosa felt her anxiety spike. Maria should have been in first period by now. She never called during school hours unless something was wrong. Mom, where are you? Maria's voice was tight with worry. You weren't home when I left for school, and you always leave me a note if you're going to be gone longer than usual. Mrs. Patterson next door said she saw you leave for your run this morning, but that was hours ago. Rosa closed her eyes. Maria was smart and observant, and she was clearly scared. I'm fine, honey. Something unexpected came up, and I had to help someone. I'm safe, but I might not be home until later today. Mom, this isn't like you. You never do anything unexpected. What's really going on? I can't explain right now, but I promise I'm okay. Stay at school, and go to Carmen's house after classes end. Don't go home until you hear from me. You're scaring me. I know, and I'm sorry. Just trust me, okay? Everything will be fine, but I need you to be careful today. After Rosa ended the call, Alexander looked at her with concern. How much does your daughter know about your work, about where you go during the day? She knows I clean houses in Riverside Heights. She knows I take my morning runs in the woods near that neighborhood. Why? Because if Marcus is as thorough as I think he is, he's going to try to identify everyone who was in the area this morning. If he figures out that you're a regular runner on that trail, he might try to find out where you live, who your family is. Rosa felt a cold knot of fear forming in her stomach. You think he would go after Maria? I think Marcus will do whatever he thinks is necessary to protect himself. And, right now, we're the only people who know what he did. Rosa stood up abruptly and started pacing around the small office. This was escalating beyond anything she had imagined when she decided to help Alexander. She had thought she was saving someone's life and maybe doing the right thing. She hadn't thought about the possibility that her own daughter might be in danger. We need to call Agent Chen right now, she said firmly. We need to get protection for Maria, and we need to stop Marcus before this gets any worse. Alexander nodded and dialed the number for the FBI field office. When he asked for Agent Chen, he was told that she was in court but would be available later that afternoon. Alexander left a message saying that it was urgent and involved organized crime activity that Agent Chen had been investigating. She'll call back within a few hours, he said after hanging up. But, Rosa, I think we need to consider the possibility that we're going to have to stay hidden until then. Marcus has resources and connections that we can't match. Our only advantage is that he doesn't know where we are right now. Rosa nodded, but she was thinking about Maria. Her daughter was smart and careful, but she was also 17 years old and had no idea that she might be in danger. The thought of anything happening to Maria because of Rosa's decision to help Alexander was almost unbearable. There's something else we need to do, Rosa said suddenly. We need to warn the people who might be in danger because they know me. Carmen, Eduardo, Maria's teachers at school. If Marcus is really going to be thorough about finding us, he might question anyone who has had contact with us today. Alexander looked at her with growing respect. You're thinking like someone who has had to protect herself and her family before. I've been a single mother in a tough neighborhood for 18 years, Rosa replied. You learn to think ahead about what could go wrong. As they planned their next moves, Rosa couldn't help but reflect on how much her life had changed in just a few hours. This morning, her biggest worry had been whether Maria would get into a good college. Now she was hiding in an auto shop with a billionaire, planning how to expose a criminal conspiracy while trying to keep her daughter safe from a man who had already tried to commit murder. But, despite the fear and uncertainty, Rosa didn't regret her decision to help Alexander. She had spent too many years being invisible, keeping her head down, avoiding risks. For once in her life, she was taking a stand for what was right, regardless of the consequences. The only question now was whether they would survive long enough to see justice done. Agent Saracen called back sooner than expected. Alexander's phone buzzed just after noon, and, when he answered, Rosa could hear the urgency in the FBI agent's voice even from across the small office. Alexander Blackwood? I've been trying to reach you all morning. Your brother Marcus filed a missing person report, claiming you didn't come home last night and weren't answering your phone. He seemed very concerned about your welfare." Alexander looked at Rosa grimly before responding. "Agent Chen, Marcus isn't concerned about my welfare. He's the reason I'm missing. He drugged me last night, tied me to a tree in Millionaire's woods, and left me to die. The only reason I'm alive is because a woman found me this morning and helped me escape." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "That's a very serious accusation, Mr. Blackwood. Where are you now? I can send agents to pick you up and take your statement." "I don't think that's safe yet. Marcus has connections throughout the police department and probably the federal building too. I need to know that I can trust you before I reveal my location." "Mr. Blackwood, I understand your concerns, but I can't help you if you won't tell me where you are. And, frankly, what you're describing sounds like it could be the result of a head injury or some kind of psychological episode." Rosa could see Alexander's frustration growing. Agent Chen's skepticism was exactly what they had expected, but it was still disappointing. They needed someone in law enforcement to believe their story, and if the FBI agent who had been investigating organized crime connections wasn't willing to listen, they didn't have many other options. "Agent Chen," Alexander said carefully, 3 months ago, you asked me to provide information about any suspicious business activities I became aware of in connection with the Riverside Development Project. I told you then that I would contact you if I discovered anything relevant. Well, I've discovered something very relevant, and it directly involves my brother." This got Agent Chen's attention. Rosa could hear her voice change, becoming more focused and professional. "What kind of information are you talking about?" "Money laundering through real estate investments, connections to organized crime families, falsified financial documents. I have evidence that Marcus has been using our company as a front for cleaning illegal proceeds from drug trafficking and other criminal activities." "Where is this evidence?" "In a safe deposit box at First National Bank downtown. Box number 1247. I have documentation of financial transfers, photographs of meetings with known criminals, and recorded conversations with Marcus discussing the arrangements." Agent Chen was quiet for almost a minute. When she spoke again, her tone was completely different. "Mr. Blackwood, if what you're saying is true, then you're in serious danger. These are not the kind of people who allow witnesses to their activities to walk away." "I know. That's why Marcus tried to kill me. I'm going to need you to come in so we can take your formal statement and begin the process of obtaining warrants for that safe deposit box. But I understand your concerns about security. Let me arrange for a secure location where we can meet, somewhere outside the normal federal building where there would be less chance of word getting back to anyone who might be compromised." Alexander looked at Rosa, who nodded. They needed to trust someone, and Agent Chen seemed to be taking the situation seriously now. "There's one more thing," Alexander said. "The woman who helped me escape this morning is also in danger now. Marcus will try to identify her and eliminate her as a witness. She has a teenage daughter who could be at risk too. Bring her with you to the meeting. We'll discuss protective options for both of you and her family." After Alexander provided Agent Chen with a description of their current location, she arranged to meet them at a small diner on the outskirts of the city in 2 hours. She would come alone and in an unmarked car to avoid drawing attention. While they waited, Rosa called Maria's school and spoke to the principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, whom she had known for several years. Without going into details, Rosa explained that there was a family emergency and that Maria needed to be kept at school until Rosa could pick her up personally. She emphasized that under no circumstances should Maria be allowed to leave with anyone else, even if they claimed to be family friends or said Rosa had sent them. Mrs. Rodriguez was clearly curious about the unusual request, but she agreed to keep Maria at school and to call Rosa immediately if anyone showed up asking about her daughter. "Mom, you're really starting to scare me," Maria said when Rosa called her directly. "What kind of family emergency requires me to stay at school until you personally pick me up? And why do you sound like you're calling from inside a garage?" Rosa looked around Eduardo's auto shop office with its metal filing cabinets and the constant background noise of air tools and engines. "I can't explain everything right now, but I promise I will tonight." Just please trust me and stay at school until I get there.
Does this have anything to do with why you didn't come home from your run this morning?
Rosa was constantly amazed by her daughter's intelligence and intuition. Maria had always been able to read people and situations better than most adults, which was part of what made her such a good student but also what made it difficult to keep things from her.
Yes, it does.
But, Maria, I need you to understand that everything I'm doing is to keep us both safe.
Can you trust me on this?
I trust you, Mom.
But, promise me you'll tell me everything tonight.
I promise.
After Rosa hung up, Alexander studied her face. She's smart. Too smart sometimes.
She gets that from her father. Rosa realized she had never mentioned Maria's father before, and Alexander was looking at her curiously. He was a teacher, very intelligent man. He died in a car accident when Maria was 6.
I'm sorry. That must have been incredibly difficult.
It was. But Maria and I figured out how to take care of each other.
She's the reason I work so hard, the reason I want to do better.
Everything I do is about making sure she has opportunities one never had. Alexander nodded, and Rosa could see that he was beginning to understand what was at stake for her. This wasn't just about doing the right thing or helping a stranger. This was about protecting the most important person in her life and preserving the future they had worked so hard to build together.
Eduardo knocked on the office door and stuck his head in.
Rosa, there were some men here asking about you. They said they were police, but they didn't show badges, and they were asking strange questions. Rosa felt her blood turn cold.
What kind of questions?
They wanted to know if you had been here today, if you had been with anyone, what kind of car you drive. I told them I hadn't seen you, but one of them was looking at Carmen's Honda in the parking lot and asking if it belonged to a customer.
Alexander stood up immediately. We need to leave. Now. Where can we go?
Rosa asked. If they're looking for Mrs. Garcia's car, they'll be watching her house too.
Eduardo spoke up.
I have a delivery truck parked behind the building. You could use that to get wherever you need to go.
It's not registered to anyone in your family, so they won't be looking for it. Rosa looked at Eduardo with gratitude.
She had known the Garcia family for years, but she hadn't realized how far they would be willing to go to help her. Eduardo, this could get you in trouble.
My family came here to escape people who used violence to get their way. We don't help bullies, no matter who they are. 20 minutes later, Rosa was driving Eduardo's delivery truck toward the diner where they were supposed to meet Agent Chen.
Alexander was in the passenger seat, keeping watch for any vehicles that might be following them. The truck was much larger than anything Rosa was used to driving, but it had the advantage of making them nearly invisible. Nobody would expect to find a billionaire and a maid riding in a plumbing supply delivery truck.
Rosa, Alexander said as they navigated through afternoon traffic, I've been thinking about what happens after we meet with Agent Chen.
Even if she believes us, even if she can get warrants for the evidence in the safe deposit box, it's going to take time to build a case against Marcus. During that time, we'll be in protective custody, which means you won't be able to work, Maria will be disrupted from her normal life, and there's no guarantee that the government will provide enough support to cover your expenses.
Rosa had been thinking about the same issues. Federal protective custody was designed to keep witnesses alive, not to maintain their quality of life.
She and Maria could end up in a motel room in another state, living on government per diem payments while they waited for Marcus's trial to conclude. Even if justice was ultimately served, the process could destroy everything Rosa had worked to build.
What are you suggesting? She asked.
I'm suggesting that when this is over, I want to offer you and Maria a new start.
Not charity, not some kind of guilt payment, but a real opportunity. You saved my life, Rosa.
That's worth more than money, but I can at least make sure that helping me doesn't ruin your life. Rosa was quiet for a moment, concentrating on navigating a complicated intersection. The offer was tempting, but it also made her uncomfortable. She had spent her entire adult life working for what she had, never accepting handouts, never depending on anyone else to solve her problems. The idea of being financially dependent on Alexander, even temporarily, felt like it would change something fundamental about who she was.
"Can we talk about this after we make sure we're both going to survive?" she asked.
Of course.
"But I want you to know the offer is serious."
They reached the diner 15 minutes early and parked the truck behind the building where it wouldn't be visible from the main road. The diner was exactly the kind of place Agent Chen had chosen for good reason, busy enough that their conversation would be lost in the general noise, but not so upscale that they would stand out or be remembered. Agent Chen arrived exactly on time, driving a red sedan that looked like it belonged to any suburban working mother. She was younger than Rosa had expected, probably in her mid-30s, with short black hair and the kind of professional demeanor that suggested she was very good at her job. After they ordered coffee and made sure they weren't being observed, Agent Chen got straight to business.
"Mr.
Blackwood, I've been investigating money laundering activities connected to real estate developments for the past 18 months. Several of the leads I've been following have pointed toward your company, but I've never had enough evidence to move forward with warrants or arrests."
"What kind of leads?" Alexander asked.
Financial transfers that don't match the stated purposes of real estate transactions, meetings between legitimate business people and known associates of organized crime families, properties that are purchased and then sold multiple times in short periods for no apparent business reason.
Alexander nodded grimly.
That all fits with what I discovered about Marcus's activities. The evidence in my safe deposit box includes documentation of at least 12 major money laundering operations over the past 2 years, involving more than $50 million in illegal proceeds.
Agent Chen leaned forward intently. $50 million?
Mr. Blackwood, if you can prove that level of criminal activity, we're talking about federal charges that could put your brother away for the rest of his life.
I can prove it.
The question is whether we can access the evidence before Marcus figures out that I'm still alive and tries to destroy it. I can get an emergency warrant for the safe deposit box within a few hours, but I'll need your formal statement first. And I'll need corroborating testimony from Mrs. Martinez about finding you in the woods and what you told her about your brother's activities.
Rosa spoke up for the first time since they had sat down. "Agent Chen, what about protection for my daughter?"
"She's still at school right now, but men came to my neighbor's auto shop asking questions about me. I'm worried that they'll try to use her to get to me. We can arrange protective custody for both of you, starting immediately. I can have agents at your daughter's school within 30 minutes to escort her to a safe house."
"For how long?" Rosa asked.
"That depends on how quickly we can build the case and how cooperative your testimony is in securing convictions. Could be a few weeks, could be several months."
Rosa felt her heart sink.
Several months in protective custody would mean Maria missing most of her senior year of high school. It would mean missing college application deadlines, scholarship opportunities, and all the normal milestone events that Rosa had been looking forward to sharing with her daughter.
Alexander seemed to read her thoughts. "Agent Chen, what if we could guarantee Mrs. Martinez's safety without putting her in protective custody? What if she had private security that could protect her and her daughter while allowing them to maintain their normal lives?" Agent Chen looked skeptical. "Private security is expensive, and it's not something the federal government can arrange or pay for."
"I can pay for it," Alexander said simply. "And I can arrange for the kind of security that would be more effective than hiding in a government safe house." Rosa looked at Alexander with a mixture of gratitude and concern. He was offering to solve her problems with money again, but this time it wasn't just about her pride. This was about Maria's future and their ability to live normal lives while helping to bring a criminal to justice.
"Let me think about it," she said. Agent Chen nodded. "We'll need to decide quickly."
"Every hour that passes increases the risk that Mr. Blackwood's brother will realize he's still alive and take steps to eliminate both of you." As they discussed the logistical details of accessing the safe deposit box evidence and arranging protection for Rosa's family, Rosa found herself making a mental transition. For the first time in her adult life, she was part of something bigger than just surviving and taking care of Maria. She was helping to expose corruption and bring justice to someone who had thought his money and power made him untouchable. It was terrifying, But it was also oddly liberating. Rosa Martinez, who had spent 20 years cleaning other people's houses and staying invisible, was about to help bring down one of the most powerful men in the city. And, maybe, just maybe, she and Maria would come out of this experience with more opportunities than they had ever imagined possible. The question was whether they would live long enough to see those opportunities become reality. Agent Chen moved quickly once she had their statements. Within 2 hours, she had obtained an emergency warrant for Alexander's safe deposit box and arranged for a team of federal agents to secure the evidence. Rosa and Alexander waited in a secure conference room at a regional FBI office while Agent Chen and her team reviewed the documents and recordings that Alexander had compiled over the previous months. Rosa used the time to call Maria and explain, as simply as possible, what was happening. She told her daughter that she had witnessed something important and was helping the FBI with an investigation. She didn't mention the attempted murder or the immediate danger they were in, but she did explain that they would need to have security protection for a while. "Mom, are you telling me that we're going to have bodyguards?" Maria asked with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "Something like that. It's just a precaution, honey. This is about more than just witnessing something, isn't it? You're not telling me everything." Rosa closed her eyes. Maria was too smart to be fooled for long. "You're right, I'm not telling you everything. But I promise I will tonight when I pick you up from school. Right now, I just need you to trust me and stay where you are until I can get there safely." When Agent Chen returned to the conference room an hour later, her expression was grim but determined. "Mr. Blackwood, the evidence you collected is even more damning than you indicated. We have documented proof of money laundering operations involving 3 major organized crime families, falsified financial records going back 3 years, and recorded conversations that implicate not just your brother but several other prominent business people and at least 2 city council members." "So you can arrest Marcus?" Alexander asked. "We can, but we have a bigger problem now. Based on the evidence you collected, this criminal enterprise is much larger than just your brother's activities. If we arrest him immediately, the other people involved will have time to destroy evidence and disappear. We need to coordinate arrests of everyone involved simultaneously." Rosa felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. "How long will that take?" "At least a week, possibly 2. We need time to build cases against all the co-conspirators and coordinate with other law enforcement agencies." Agent Chen, Alexander said carefully, "A week is a very long time for Rosa and her daughter to be in danger. Marcus is going to realize very soon that I'm not dead, and when he does, he's going to be looking for the person who helped me escape. Which is why I'm recommending that both of you enter protective custody immediately. We can move you to a secure location tonight." Rosa shook her head. "Agent Chen, my daughter is a senior in high school. She has college applications due in the next few weeks, and she's worked too hard to miss those deadlines because I stumbled into this situation. There has to be another way." Alexander spoke up. "What if Rosa and her daughter had private protection? Professional security that would allow them to maintain their normal routines while staying safe?" Agent Chen looked skeptical. "Mr. Blackwood, this isn't a movie. Professional private security that could actually protect civilians from organized crime retaliation costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, and even then, there are no guarantees. I can afford it, and I know people who provide that level of service. Former Secret Service agents, ex-military special operations personnel. People who know how to keep clients safe in hostile situations. And you're willing to pay for this because Mrs. Martinez saved your life?" "I'm willing to pay for this because Mrs. Martinez took a huge risk to help someone she didn't even know, and now she's in danger because of that choice. The least I can do is make sure she and her daughter stay safe while we see this through." Agent Chen studied both of them for a moment. "Even with private security, you would both be taking significant risks. Marcus Blackwood has connections and resources that most criminals don't have. If he decides that eliminating you is worth the risk of exposing himself further, he could bring a lot of firepower to bear. What if we don't just hide from Marcus?" Rosa asked suddenly. Both Agent Chen and
Alexander looked at her in surprise. What if we let him find us, but on our terms? What do you mean? Agent Chen asked. Rosa had been thinking about their situation while Agent Chen was reviewing the evidence.
They were essentially playing defense, trying to stay hidden while other people built a case against Marcus. But that approach put them at a disadvantage, because Marcus had more resources and connections than they did. They needed to find a way to take control of the situation.
Marcus tried to kill Alexander because he was afraid that Alexander would expose his criminal activities. But Marcus doesn't know that Alexander has already turned over evidence to the FBI. What if we let Marcus think that Alexander is still the only person who knows about his activities, and that Alexander is willing to make a deal? Alexander understood immediately.
You're suggesting that I contact Marcus and arrange a meeting, pretending that I want to negotiate.
Exactly.
But, instead of trying to make a deal with him, we used the meeting to get him to confess on tape. With Agent Chen and her team listening, we could get Marcus to admit to the attempted murder and to his other criminal activities.
Agent Chen was shaking her head. That's incredibly dangerous.
If Marcus suspects it's a trap, or if he decides that killing you is easier than negotiating with you, you could both end up dead.
But, if it works, Alexander said thoughtfully, we could wrap up this entire case in a matter of days instead of weeks. And Rosa and her daughter could go back to their normal lives much sooner. The risk is enormous, Agent Chen emphasized. Mr. Blackwood, your brother has already tried to kill you once. If you give him another opportunity, he's likely to finish the job.
Unless we make sure he doesn't get the chance, Rosa said. What if the meeting takes place somewhere public, where Marcus wouldn't be able to use violence without exposing himself?
And what if we make sure the FBI is close enough to intervene if something goes wrong? Alexander was nodding slowly.
Rosa's right. Marcus is a criminal, but he's also a businessman who thinks strategically. He won't want to create a public spectacle that would draw attention to his activities. If I approach him correctly, he'll want to meet somewhere he feels safe and in control. Agent Chen was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing the risks and benefits of Rosa's suggestion. Finally, she spoke. If we were to consider this approach, we would need extensive surveillance and backup. We would need a location that gives us tactical advantages while appearing normal to Marcus. And we would need both of you to be wearing recording devices that would capture everything he says.
You're willing to consider it? Rosa asked. I'm willing to discuss the possibility with my supervisors.
But, Mrs. Martinez, you need to understand that you wouldn't just be a witness in this scenario. You would be an active participant in a federal sting operation targeting dangerous criminals. That's a level of risk that goes far beyond what most civilians would ever consider. Rosa thought about Maria, who was still at school, trusting that her mother would come pick her up safely. She thought about the college applications that were due soon, and the future that she and her daughter had worked so hard to build. But she also thought about all the other people who could be hurt if Marcus and his criminal associates weren't stopped.
Agent Chen, how many people do you think Marcus has hurt with his criminal activities? How much damage has he done to communities, to families? Based on what we've seen in Mr. Blackwood's evidence, probably hundreds of people.
Money laundering operations on this scale typically involve drugs, human trafficking, and other crimes that destroy lives. Then, we have to stop him.
And, if this is the fastest way to do it, then, I'm willing to take the risk. Alexander looked at Rosa with something approaching awe. Rosa, you don't have to do this. I could approach Marcus alone. No, you couldn't. Marcus already tried to kill you once.
If you show up alive without a convincing explanation for how you escaped and why you haven't already gone to the police, he'll know it's a trap. But, if I'm with you, if you tell him that I found you and that I want money in exchange for staying quiet about what I saw, he might believe that you're trying to contain the situation instead of expose it.
Agent Chen was taking notes rapidly. You're suggesting that you would pose as a potential accomplice rather than a witness?
I'm suggesting that I would pose as someone who was more interested in financial gain than in justice. Marcus thinks in terms of money and power.
He might believe that someone in my economic situation would be willing to take a payoff in exchange for silence.
That could work, Alexander said slowly.
Marcus has always believed that everyone has a price, that anyone can be bought if you offer them enough money. He might not question the scenario if it fits with his worldview. Agent Chen closed her notebook and stood up.
I need to discuss this with my team and my supervisors. If we decide to move forward with this approach, we'll need to plan every detail carefully.
The margin for error would be essentially zero. How long before you can give us an answer?
Rosa asked. A few hours. In the meantime, I'm going to arrange for protection for your daughter and for you to be moved to a secure location for tonight. Even if we decide to move forward with the sting operation, we'll need time to plan it properly.
After Agent Chen left, Rosa and Alexander sat in the conference room in silence for several minutes. Rosa was beginning to fully comprehend what she had just volunteered to do.
She was proposing to deceive one of the most dangerous men in the city, someone who had already committed attempted murder and who had connections to organized crime families. If something went wrong, she and Maria could both end up dead. But, as scared as she was, Rosa also felt a sense of purpose that she had never experienced before. For her entire adult life, she had been focused on survival, on taking care of Maria and herself. She had never had the luxury of thinking about justice or making a difference in the world beyond her immediate family. Now, suddenly, she was in a position to help stop someone who was causing real harm to innocent people.
Rosa, Alexander said quietly, I want you to know that whatever you decide, I respect your choice.
But, I also want you to think carefully about what you're considering.
Marcus isn't just a white-collar criminal.
The evidence we turned over to Agent Chen shows that he's been working with people who use violence as a routine part of their business operations.
I understand that. But, Alexander, what choice do I really have?
Even if I go into protective custody, even if I hide with Maria for weeks or months while the FBI builds their case, Marcus is still going to be out there.
He's still going to be looking for me.
The only way this ends safely for my family is if Marcus is in prison.
And, you think the sting operation is the best way to make that happen? Rosa considered the question carefully. I think it's the fastest way to make that happen. And, right now, speed matters more than anything else. Alexander nodded.
Then, we'll make it work. And, Rosa, whatever happens, I want you to know that I'll make sure Maria is taken care of. Even if something happens to both of us, she'll have opportunities, she'll be able to go to college, she'll have a chance at the kind of life you've been working to give her. Rosa felt tears forming in her eyes for the first time since this ordeal had begun.
Thank you. That means more to me than you could possibly understand.
As they waited for Agent Chen to return with her decision, Rosa called Maria one more time. She couldn't tell her daughter about the sting operation, but she could at least hear her voice and remind her how much she was loved.
Mom, when is this going to be over? Maria asked. I'm getting really worried about you. Soon, honey.
It's going to be over soon, and then everything will go back to normal.
Promise me you're being careful. I promise.
But, even as she said it, Rosa knew that in a few hours, she would be doing something that was the opposite of careful. She would be walking into a confrontation with a man who had already tried to commit murder, betting everything on her ability to convince him that she could be bought instead of feared. It was the biggest risk she had ever taken, but it was also the first time in her life that she was fighting for something bigger than just her own survival. And, somehow, that made the risk feel worthwhile. Agent Chen returned 3 hours later with approval for the sting operation and a detailed plan that had been developed by a team of federal agents and tactical specialists. The meeting with Marcus would take place the following evening at the Riverside Country Club, an upscale restaurant where Marcus was a member and where he would feel comfortable and in control. The country club gives us several advantages, Agent Chen explained as she laid out diagrams of the location. It's a public place where Marcus won't be able to use violence without creating witnesses. The dining room has excellent acoustics for recording devices, and we can position agents throughout the restaurant without drawing attention. Most importantly, Marcus will choose this location because he'll feel like he's on familiar territory.
Alexander would call Marcus that evening and suggest that they need to discuss finding a solution to their problem. He would explain that Rosa had found him in the woods and that she was willing to stay quiet about what she had seen in exchange for appropriate compensation. The story was designed to appeal to Marcus's belief that everyone could be bought and to convince him that Alexander was trying to contain the situation rather than expose it. "What exactly am I supposed to say during the meeting?" Rosa asked as she studied the floor plan of the restaurant. "As little as possible," Agent Chen replied. "We want Marcus to do most of the talking. Your role is to seem greedy but nervous, someone who wants money but is scared of getting involved in something too dangerous. Alexander will guide the conversation toward getting Marcus to explain what happened in the woods and why he felt it was necessary. And if Marcus gets suspicious? Then we abort immediately. You'll both be wearing panic buttons that will bring tactical teams into the restaurant within seconds. But, Mrs. Martinez, I want to emphasize again that if Marcus suspects this is a trap, your life could be in danger very quickly." That evening, Rosa went to collect Maria from school, accompanied by 2 FBI agents who posed as family friends. Maria was clearly curious about the strangers, but she didn't ask questions until they were alone in the secure hotel room where they would be staying overnight. "Mom, those people are federal agents, aren't they?" Maria asked as soon as the door was closed. Rosa looked at her daughter, who was sitting on one of the twin beds with her arms crossed and a determined expression that Rosa recognized from years of parent-teacher conferences. Maria had always been able to see through adult attempts to shield her from difficult truths. "Yes, they are. And this thing you witnessed, it was something serious enough that the FBI is involved in, we need protection?" "Yes." Maria was quiet for a moment, processing what she had been told. "Mom, are you in danger?" Rosa sat down on the bed next to her daughter and took her hands. "Maria, I need you to understand something. Sometimes people have to take risks to do what's right. I found someone who was in trouble this morning, and helping them means that I'm now involved in something bigger than I expected." "What kind of bigger?" "The kind where the FBI is working to arrest some very bad people, and I'm helping them do it." Maria stared at her mother with a mixture of pride and terror. "Mom, you're not a cop or a federal agent. You're a maid. Why are you involved in arresting bad people?" "Because sometimes ordinary people end up in extraordinary situations, and they have to decide whether they're going to do what's safe or what's right." "And you chose what's right." "I chose what's right." Maria was quiet for several minutes, and Rosa could see her working through the implications of what she had been told. Finally, Maria spoke again. "Are you going to be okay?" "I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we both come through this safely. And, honey, no matter what happens, I want you to know that everything I've done has been about protecting our future, about making sure you have the opportunities you deserve. Mom, I'm proud of you. I'm scared, but I'm proud of you." Rosa felt tears forming in her eyes again. She had been so focused on protecting Maria that she hadn't considered how her daughter would react to learning that her mother was involved in something dangerous but important. Maria's pride and support meant more to her than any amount of money or recognition ever could. The next evening, Rosa found herself sitting in the elegant dining room of the Riverside Country Club, wearing a simple black dress that Alexander had bought for her and a recording device that was so small she could barely feel it. Alexander sat across from her, looking nervous but determined. Around the restaurant, she could see people who she now knew were federal agents, dressed as wealthy diners and positioned to intervene quickly if necessary. Marcus Blackwood arrived exactly on time, looking like the successful businessman he appeared to be to the outside world. He was younger than Alexander, with the same strong features but a harder expression around his eyes. As he approached their table, Rosa could see him evaluating her, trying to determine what kind of threat or opportunity she represented. "Alex," Marcus said as he sat down, "I have to say, I'm relieved to see you. When you didn't come home yesterday, I was worried that something terrible had happened to you." "Something terrible did happen to me," Alexander replied calmly. "But, fortunately, Mrs. Martinez here found me before it was too late." Marcus turned his attention to Rosa, and she felt her skin crawl under his scrutiny. "Mrs. Martinez. I understand you were jogging in the woods yesterday morning when you discovered my brother.
Yes, sir, Rosa said, trying to project the nervousness of someone who was in over her head but motivated by greed.
I run that trail every morning before work. I've never seen anything like what I found. And what exactly did you find? Rosa looked at Alexander, who nodded for her to continue. I found Mr. Blackwood tied to a tree, hurt and dehydrated. He told me that you had put him there.
Marcus's expression didn't change, but Rosa saw his hands tighten slightly on his water glass.
That's quite an accusation. Did my brother tell you why he thinks I would do such a thing?
This was the crucial moment. Rosa needed to convince Marcus that she was interested in money, not justice, and that Alexander was trying to contain the situation rather than expose it. He said it was about business problems, about disagreements over company finances. But Mr. Blackwood told me that you might be willing to pay for my discretion, to make sure this stays a private family matter. Marcus leaned back in his chair, and Rosa could see him calculating.
I see. And what kind of discretion are we talking about, Mrs. Martinez?
The kind where I forget I ever saw anything, or I forget this conversation ever happened. Mr. Blackwood suggested that you might be generous enough to help me with some financial difficulties I've been having.
What kind of financial difficulties? Rosa had rehearsed this part with Agent Chen.
My daughter is a senior in high school, and I'm trying to save money for her college tuition. The jobs I can get don't pay enough to cover everything, and I was worried she might not be able to go to a good school. Marcus smiled, but it was a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes.
Education is expensive these days. I'm sure we could work something out that would benefit everyone involved.
Marcus, Alexander said, leaning forward slightly, I think we need to be clear about what we're discussing here. Mrs. Martinez saw me tied to a tree, injured and left to die.
She knows that you're the one who put me there.
The question is whether she's going to keep that information private or share it with the authorities.
And you're confident that Mrs. Martinez is someone who can be trusted to honor a financial agreement? I think Mrs. Martinez is a practical woman who understands that discretion can be profitable, Alexander replied.
Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying both of them carefully.
Rosa held her breath, wondering if he was buying their story or if he was starting to suspect that something was wrong.
Mrs. Martinez, Marcus said finally, I'm curious about something.
When you found my brother yesterday, what exactly did he tell you about why he was in that situation?
This was dangerous territory. Rosa needed to provide enough detail to convince Marcus that Alexander had confided in her, but not so much that Marcus would realize she knew about his criminal activities. He said you had disagreed about business matters, that you thought he was going to cause problems for you with partners or investors. He said you drugged him and left him tied to the tree to teach him a lesson, but that you probably weren't really going to let him die.
Marcus's smile became more genuine. A lesson.
Yes, I suppose you could call it that. Alex has always been idealistic, Mrs. Martinez. He doesn't understand that sometimes business requires making compromises that aren't entirely ethical.
What kind of compromises? Rosa asked, trying to sound like someone who was curious about the wealthy world she was being invited to join.
The kind that involve working with people who don't share Alex's scruples about following every rule and regulation. The kind that can be very profitable for everyone involved, but that require absolute loyalty and discretion.
Alexander leaned forward. Marcus, are you talking about the money laundering operations? The partnerships with organized crime families?
Rosa saw Marcus's expression harden immediately.
Alex, I thought we agreed that you were going to be smarter about this situation. I'm trying to be smart about it.
But Mrs. Martinez deserves to know what she's being asked to keep quiet about. If you want her silence, she needs to understand the full scope of what she witnessed. Marcus was silent for almost a minute, and Rosa could see him weighing his options. Finally, he spoke, and his voice had lost any pretense of warmth or friendliness. Mrs. Martinez, my brother discovered that I have been using our family business to facilitate certain financial arrangements for clients who prefer to keep their transactions private. These arrangements are highly profitable, but they do require circumventing certain banking regulations and tax requirements.
You mean money laundering, Rosa said quietly.
I mean providing financial services to clients who are willing to pay premium fees for privacy and flexibility. When Alex threatened to expose these arrangements to federal authorities, I felt it was necessary to convince him that such action would not be in anyone's best interests.
So you tried to kill him?
Marcus's expression became truly dangerous.
I tried to help Alex understand that sometimes family loyalty requires making difficult choices.
Unfortunately, Alex has always been too naive to appreciate the realities of doing business in the modern world.
Alexander spoke up.
Marcus, you left me tied to a tree to die.
How is that about business realities?
Because, dear brother, your idealism was about to destroy everything our family has built over the past 3 generations.
The partnerships I've developed generate more revenue than all of our legitimate business activities combined.
Losing those partnerships because of your moral squeamishness would have cost hundreds of jobs and millions of dollars in investments.
Rosa could hardly believe what she was hearing.
Marcus was essentially confessing to attempted murder and major criminal activity while justifying it as business necessity.
She could see why Agent Chen had wanted to record this conversation. And what about Mrs. Martinez? Alexander asked.
She knows about your activities now.
Are you planning to teach her a lesson too?
Marcus turned his cold gaze back to Rosa. Mrs. Martinez seems like a practical woman who understands the value of discretion. I'm sure we can reach an arrangement that satisfies everyone involved.
What kind of arrangement? Rosa asked.
The kind that ensures your daughter can attend any college she wants, with all expenses paid.
The kind that provides you with a comfortable income that doesn't require you to clean other people's houses.
The kind that comes with the understanding that certain information must never be shared with anyone, especially law enforcement.
Rosa pretended to consider the offer. And if I decide that I can't keep quiet about what I've seen?
Marcus's smile returned, but it was terrifying. Then, you would discover that accidents happen, Mrs. Martinez.
Sometimes people go for their morning runs and simply never come home.
Sometimes teenage girls walking home from school encounter dangerous situations. The threat against Maria made Rosa's blood turn cold, but it also filled her with a rage that she had never experienced before. Marcus Blackwood had just threatened her daughter's life while offering to pay for her education. The casual way he discussed violence against innocent people confirmed everything that Alexander had told her about his brother's character. I understand, Rosa said, forcing her voice to remain steady.
Excellent.
Then, I think we can consider this matter resolved.
Alex, I trust you've learned something about the importance of family loyalty from this experience.
I've learned something, Alexander said grimly. Marcus stood up from the table and straightened his jacket. Mrs. Martinez, you'll be hearing from my attorney within the next few days about the financial arrangements we discussed. I'm sure you'll find our offer more than generous. As Marcus turned to leave, Agent Chen appeared at their table as if she had been a customer walking to the restroom. Marcus Blackwood, you're under arrest for attempted murder, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. The look of shock and, then, rage that crossed Marcus's face was something Rosa would remember for the rest of her life. He had been so confident, so certain that his money and power made him sometimes fate has a twisted sense of humor. It takes a woman who has spent her entire life cleaning up other people's messes and places her at the center of a mystery that will shake the foundations of wealth and power.
What happens when the invisible becomes the hero? When someone society overlooks becomes the key to unraveling a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of influence?
This is the story of Rosa Martinez, a woman who thought her biggest concern was whether she'd have enough money for her daughter's college tuition. She had no idea that one morning jog through the woods would thrust her into a world of billion-dollar secrets, family betrayals, and a choice that would either save a life or destroy her own. In a world where money talks and the poor stay silent, Rosa is about to discover that sometimes the most powerful voice belongs to someone who has nothing left to lose. Her decision in those crucial moments will prove that courage doesn't come from bank accounts, but from the heart of someone who knows what it means to fight for survival. What would you do if you stumbled upon someone who could change your life forever, but saving them might cost you everything you've worked for?
Rosa Martinez is about to find out, and her answer will surprise everyone, including herself.